Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping young entrepreneurs succeed at both business as well as their life. In today's episode, I have my new friend Malumir with me. I'm going to dissect a lot with Malumir about the different structures we have inside of our lives, what they mean for us as well as our businesses, and how we can maintain peace throughout the entire opportunity of running our businesses. Malumir has a very interesting story and a very interesting message on peace, as she'll get into here in just a second. Before we dive into everything, though, I just want to thank everybody who's listening to today's episode. Once again, if you've been a longtime listener of the Get Over Yourself podcast, make sure to always leave a positive review or share the show with somebody who you think would be impacted from it. Guys, with that all being said, I'm so happy to introduce Malumir. Let's jump into today's episode. So Malumir, I kind of introduced you as a peaceful figure here, and there's a reason I'm doing that. I want you to tell everyone why I'm doing that. Tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, Brandon. Yes, my name is Malumir. And the reason you're bringing up the peace aspect is that my name actually means peace. It actually means peace, peace. So my parents wanted a name that meant peace. You know, they were from the era of ban the bombs and, the peace sign and all that. And they wanted a name that meant peace. So they looked up international dictionaries for words that meant peace, and they found Malu in Hawaiian and Mir in Slavic, and they stuck them together. And I am neither Hawaiian nor Slavic. But,
Nice.
Something, because, often people say, oh, you must be such a peaceful person. Then I say, well, I think it depends on how you define peace.
True.
Because I think some people might assume that peace is just being maybe just super chill or just not making a fuss about things. Whereas I actually don't agree with that. The play, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on it. The Rent, the play Rent. There is a song with a line that says, the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. But to me, peace actually is creation, right? Because it is an active thing. It's just like when we're balanced, being balanced is not a passive act. It's very active. So anyway, that's my take on peace and how I perceive myself as a peaceful person, because I've definitely been known to be a bit of a shit disturber sometimes. So,
Nice.
And yet I do
Love
it
that.
peacefully.
Love it. Well, I think that's the key too, because there's the peace aspect where you can sit back and just always be nice to everybody. I'm not saying that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing. But there's the point to where peace becomes so nonchalant that no change is actually happening. And so if you're sitting back and constantly peaceful and just letting life take it where it is, some people can get away with that, and they're amazing people who can definitely let that ride inside of their lives. But in order to take action, you definitely have to step out of your comfort zone and maybe not use the traditional definition of peace like you mentioned. One point that I wanted to highlight right there is you brought up that peace, in a sense, is creation. A lot of the listeners here on the Get Over Yourself podcast are creators, especially when it comes to the business world. They've created businesses, they've created jobs for other people, they've created lives for both themselves, their employees, their families. What does creation mean to you in that sense in the business world? And you have a very interesting outlook on the business world as well, because you're involved, you're more of a coach and you help other people in this realm, but you're not like super like entrepreneurial, is for the lack of a better term as well.
Yeah, so I'm quite multidisciplinary, and I love the idea, that question of creation, because to me, all people are inherently creative. We may create in different ways, but I firmly believe that we are all creative in some ways. So, for example, I have created a very dynamic career for myself. I am both an experienced leader in the more corporate realm and strategy and operations. I'm also an adjunct professor teaching leadership and career skills development. And I also am a small business owner in the spiritual industry. And All of those things are very, very different kinds of work. And I have created a career in each one of those, while I've also created an overall career that reflects everything that is required to go into those. And, when people ask about, well, how do you approach creation then when you're doing so many different things? To me, one of the most important things is to actually do a lot of rest and reflection.
Mm.
If you want to be able to keep creating and keep going, then you need to make sure that you're being really sustainable in terms of how you're managing your output, but also your input. We can't always breathe out. We have to breathe in as well, right? And just like, right now I'm dealing with some medical stuff, but usually I'm a runner up to marathon distance, and I hike and cycle and snowshoe, what have you. I do all the things. And I have friends who are ultra runners. And so they're running, I think it's 100 miles. It's something really, really intense. And so I asked them, well, how on earth do you do that? And they said, well, the key is you cannot run the whole way. You have to go back and forth between running and walking, running and walking, running and walking. And that's how you make the distance. And to me, it's exactly the same thing, whether you're in a super creative career, i.e. creative, or with air quotes, or if you are simply creating your career, creating careers for other people, whatever you're doing, it's really important to do so sustainably.
What's interesting about that too is I've never really considered myself a very creative person. Because I think it comes back to like the younger days in the society we grew up in, especially the schooling system. You picture the creative people are the ones who are good at art. They could draw and make things come to life on a picture. They can be creative in that aspect. We don't really highlight the creative side of like a visionary thinking mind. You can have the creatives who are very good authors, who are good painters, who are creative with their wardrobe and making things pop, but you don't always picture the creative side of what our own minds are capable of. And so talk a little bit about that. I know you've worked with some people on this very subject as well. What is the human mind capable of, and why do you believe we could all be creative in that aspect?
Well, the fact is, we're all creating every day, all day, whether or not we realize it. We are creating our days, we are creating our lives. Now, I will say that there are external circumstances that happen that we have no control over, but even that requires creativity from us, right? Think about it. Something bad happens, or for example, I'm taken out by major medical situation, even though I was super healthy. Okay, so how do I respond creatively? I ask myself, well, how do I solve this problem? Solving a problem is inherently creative.
Hmm.
And even though you may not consider yourself a super artsy type, you created a podcast. That's incredibly creative, and it takes a lot of different kinds of thinking. And this is, an answer to your question. I think that it's really about redefining for ourselves what creativity is, and actually thinking about what creativity is, as opposed to simply going with whatever story society has impressed upon us. Really, it's about, well, what do I want to do with my day? Well, I need to do work for my business, or I need to go to work. How am I going about my day? How am I going about making those decisions? Those are all inherently creative. And why? Because we are producing something at the end of it. Are you producing a podcast? Are we producing a response to someone's answer so they can make a decision? Are we producing decisions on things that we have to deliver? What are we delivering? That's all creative. And it requires us to really think in different ways. And this is so when you're doing work, and particularly pertaining to the business world, and especially for people who are entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, the different kinds of work you have to do in a given day is off the charts. And this is
Mhm.
something that I think a lot of folks who don't have small businesses really don't recognize, is the different categories of work that you have to do. You're constantly switching between these different ways of thinking. And even neurologically, that actually requires new pathways to be formed in your brain when you're taking on something new, when you're trying to solve a new problem that you haven't previously had to solve.
So let me ask you this. For somebody, if you would have asked me a few years ago, would you consider yourself a creative person, Brandon? I probably would have said no. But what you just said, like the creating of the podcast, the business world, like there's so many things we create that don't fit the perfect picturesque mold of what we grew up thinking was creative. So how do you strike up creativity inside of your brain? How do you build that muscle inside of your head to become more creative and more creative? Because creation ultimately is the way humans were made. Like if you think back to
Yes.
the biblical version of it, God created man. He created the universe, then he created man, right? And he created Adam and Eve, and then they created their posterity, and that's as the lineage goes down and down. So as human nature, we are creative. That is who we are as a being. So how do we cultivate more creativity inside of our lives so we can become more creative?
The key thing that I would say is be curious. Be
Hmm.
really curious. Become more curious and practice curiosity. And why I say that is that curiosity inherently recognizes that I don't know everything. I don't know everything. Well, I wonder. It's putting ourselves into a more open-minded space where instead of looking at things in a linear way and expecting everything to fall in a box, we're actually being more open-minded and allowing for more of those neurological connections I was talking about earlier to take place. Now,
Mm.
there are specific things we can do to practice curiosity other than just trying to be more curious. Maybe it's something as simple as, you know what, every day I'm just going to, write down some thoughts either in a notebook or in a journaling app or something for 5 minutes. And I'm just going to write about something that I see. Why would that help? Even if you're not interested in writing, well, if you're writing about something that you see, what you're doing is that you're taking in information that you're perceiving in some way, and you are allowing whatever's in your mind, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it seems like some weird jumbled train of consciousness, you're allowing that to come up. And there's a lot of creative energy in that because we're not used to thinking that way. We're not
Mm.
used to consciously thinking that way. We're used to just thinking, okay, I am responding to my emails, and then we're just in email mode, as opposed to thinking, I wonder what was really, I wonder what was going on in this person's life at the time that they wrote this email, or, this statement that they made. Are you sure you really understand what they're saying? Or is there an assumption there? I wonder what their lived experience is like, right? When we start to open up our thinking, whether it's through writing or any other practice that resonates with you, we allow for those new neurological connections to be made. And that inherently allows us to be more creative because then we're tapping into parts of our brain that we normally would not otherwise use.
I'm picturing some of the creative moments inside of my life, and it was times where I was doing that self-reflection you just talked about. At some points in my life, I've been better at journaling than others, and I'm not super expressive when it comes to actually writing it down, but where I am expressive is when I have these moments of called meditation, prayer, whatever you want to call it, but when I have these moments to myself where I can sit there and reflect about my day, what went good, what went bad, where I can improve for the next day. And I feel like that's personally one of my biggest creative processes. I'll be sitting in the sauna, or I'll be sitting in a camping chair if I'm up in the mountains camping, or I'll just be on my couch or in my bed just thinking. And sometimes that could be feeling like a waste of time. And I feel like a lot of the young entrepreneurs who are here listening to the show understand that. Sometimes when you just sit and you're not doing anything, you feel unproductive. And I think that goes back to the speedy world we live in today, where there's always some kind of form of entertainment or some kind of boost in our endorphins every second of the day. But if I challenge all of you to just step back and say, okay, I'm going to set aside time in my day where I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to sit back, I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm just going to sit there and think. And I promise you, that's the moments where you're going to feel connected to God. That's the moments you're going to feel a boost of adrenaline. Those are the moments where you're going to come up with a brilliant business idea or whatever it is. Those are the moments on that. And Malumir, I know you have experiences on that as well.
You know what? Rest is important, and taking time to reflect is important, and actually, I think a lot of people think, oh, but I'm not being productive. But if you really need to feel productive, especially at first, when you're first getting into the practice of regular reflection or meditation or whatever your practice is, it actually is productive because you're actually training yourself not only to think creatively, but you're actually also training yourself to think more strategically, which will pay dividends later. And the reason that I say that, I'd love, for you and all the listeners to just for a moment think about a time when you noticed that there was someone, maybe you worked with them or worked on a project with them, or you just knew them, and they were someone who was so good at very quickly sussing out a situation. They might have been quiet and just kind of observing, but then they would very quickly be able to suss up the situation and know exactly how to act. They had this skill. They may have developed it, they may have had it naturally, but you can actually develop that skill. It is a skill, and it's a skill that I teach to all of my students and anyone who comes to me for mentoring or anything. And it's just pause and reflect. The way that I structure it in such a way, because some folks do value having a specific thing to do as opposed to
Yeah.
just feeling like they're just sitting there thinking. What I encourage people to do is get out a timer or your phone, set it for 5 minutes. And whether you want to use an app or you want to write with your, a pen and paper, or you want to type it out, however you want to do it, voice app, whatever, write or talk or dictate for 5 minutes nonstop. Just start. It doesn't have to be pretty. Allow it to be a big hot mess. That's okay. And even if you start with writing, I have no idea what I'm writing, but this person on a podcast said that I should, and just keep going and just write nonstop for 5 minutes. If you do that a few times a week, you will start to notice yourself. You will start to notice yourself. You will catch yourself in the moments of noticing strategic moments in your day, whether it's in your business or whatever you're doing as you're going about your day. Those moments will start to pop up. You'll almost start to, to feel them, or you'll have cognitions of them. And it's because our minds are super processors. They are processing so much faster than any AI possibly could. And we're picking up on so much. But we often haven't actually been trained on how to tap into that. So we've got all of this untapped resource in our minds. And so when we do this practice, what you're allowing your mind to do is to start to surface a lot of the other things that it's noticing. And over time, as you get more and more used to doing this free writing for 5 minutes, your mind will faster and faster hone in on the things that you need to be paying attention to. It's amazing. It really is amazing. It's very powerful. And so that is a really structured activity that I recommend for people. But of course, for folks who already have a practice, whether you reflect or meditate or pray, whatever works for you, but that is a structured practice that a lot of people have told me they found helpful.
That's awesome. So jumping over in the conversation a little bit here, I want to talk about sustainability, what that means to you, what that means in the business realm, and how people can start practicing it so they don't burn out.
Oh my goodness. Burnout is prevalent. I think it's something like 42 or 43% of the global workforce is burnt out. That is bad. And I think a lot of people just think, oh, burnout just means, you get really tired but you can just push through. No, you cannot. Burnout results in medical problems. And take it from me, I am someone who has taken absurdly good care of my health. I've invested in my health immaculately for years, and I still got taken down by a medical issue. And I mean taken down. I am currently on medical leave from my primary job. Did I burn myself out? Well, we don't know that that's actually the cause, because I was really good about building in boundaries, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the reality is, none of us is invincible. We're all in bodies. Bodies are fallible, and how we are doing mentally and emotionally actually does affect our bodies. And the science does speak to that. Folks can look that up, okay? So there is an impact to how we are doing. So burnout is real. Our body keeps the count of what we put it through. And if we want to be successful, then we need to be able to keep going, right? We need to be able to keep going. And like I mentioned earlier, with people who do ultra running, you cannot run the whole time. The body will die. It will die or go in. Otherwise, it will need urgent care. You cannot just run nonstop for 100 miles. That's not how the body works. And it's the same thing. And so what I encourage people to think about is that I know things are always urgent, but there's a difference between urgency and importance. Okay. Because the fact is, there will never not be something urgent happening. And I understand, I've worked in work environments where it feels like absolutely everything is urgent and the demands are immense and it's just all the time nonstop. And yet, if we go 100 miles an hour all the time, we're at some point, our bodies are going to run out of capacity to keep going. And we want to be able to keep going because we want to be successful. We want to keep pursuing the things that we want to do. So what does that look like? One of the things that looks like is regularly resting. Because remember, I was saying you can't just breathe out, you have to breathe in as well. And there are different kinds of work that we can do at different times. So another thing I encourage people to think about, and especially for folks who have their own business where they have a little bit more leeway in terms of how they organize their time, because I recognize, for folks who are working, if you have a knowledge working job or another kind of job, you may not be able to choose what you do when. But if you have say over your calendar, think about when do you do your best kinds of different work? Because remember, we talked about earlier how we're doing different categories of work as business owners. And so for some people, you may do your very best work first thing in the morning, right? Your brain is fresh. You want to do your all the thinking, strategic kind of work. And then maybe you just respond to emails and do other kinds of things later in the day. Or maybe you do other things like if you have a product-based business, for example, packaging things, do that later in the day when you don't need as much brain power. Think about how you can organize your time so that you're not always just doing whack-a-mole and just trying to go after the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Actually, organize your time based on how you personally work. So that's especially for the business owners. And the other thing is to remember that it is a long game, and there are times when we do have to push harder. That's just a reality. If there is a deadline for something and we have to push harder for a short time, we can do that, being mindful that we will not be able to keep up that pace in a smart way without paying for it later. And trust me, you do not want to pay for it later. I'm a runner who can't run. It sucks. I don't recommend it, right? So make sure that you're organizing how you work, and maybe it might actually require some getting to know how you work. Maybe you've never actually noticed before. Maybe you've never noticed when you actually do your best thinking. Not everyone does their best thinking at the same time or the same day. So those are some things that I encourage people to think about as they're organizing their time. But just remember that rest and having boundaries around your work hours, it's not a waste of time. It is not a waste of time, because you want to be able to be successful. You want to be in it for the long game. And so you need to allow yourself those periods to actually just exist as a human, and also to do things that refuel you, right? I mean, it's like if you have a vehicle and you're using up all the, whether it's hybrid or whatever, you use up all the battery or you use up all the gas, you need to refuel it. You're no different, right? You don't just need sleep and food. You also need to have a life. You need to have things that refill who you are as a person. And again, coming back to the topic of creativity, you need to leave space for the creativity. And the creativity doesn't come if you're just going.
Definitely. And as a testament to that, I want to share a little bit about my business practices. I've shared this a couple times on podcasts before, where it's the balance. A lot of people call it work-life balance, and I'm not a huge fan of that term because it's never favored in one side. I prefer the word harmony. And so if you can harmonize your life and recognize that at different points, there's going to be different priorities. At certain points in your life, you are going to have to focus on work more. That is just the blatant truth of the matter. But at certain points, you're not. At certain points, you can go prioritize hanging out with your friends on the weekend. You can go spend more time with your partner. You can go, like some of your friends, Malumir, you could go start training for these crazy long ultra marathons. I guarantee not all of your friends are in the stage of life right now where they're also working 50 to 60 hours a week and training for ultra marathons on the side. They have to put the priorities in different places, because if you try and go all in on every single aspect of your life, you are going to do exactly what Malumir just said. You're going to run out of gas. Your battery's going to die. And there's that concept where I've heard this a few times, and I don't think I agree with it. There's that old cliche of, well, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. to a certain point, I believe that exists and I believe that's true, but also it's a falsity because you're going to go and do something and you're not going to be able to give it all the same effort that you did with something you're more passionate about. So if you're passionate about your work, for all my young entrepreneurs out there, if you're passionate about your business, you're going to put more effort into that than you are in, say, your physical life at the moment or your social life. You're going to put more work into your business life. And so if you can find that harmony where you could say, okay, right now, maybe the business is more important. I'm going to spend more time there. That's what you're going to focus on. And I'm not saying you can't have other things inside of that, but that is priority number one. So figure out what your harmony is, figure out what your priorities right now. And of course, as Malumir can attest, they're going to change every once in a while. It could change every couple months, every couple days. But as long as when you're in that moment, if you could be present in that moment, focusing on your priority, that's going to make the difference. So Malumir, as we're coming to a close of today's episode of Get Over Yourself podcast, I'd love for you to share one final thought as well as where people can reach out to you if they have any questions.
Absolutely. So I think the final thought I would love to share about all of this is that it really comes down to the choices that we're making, right? And it's I like to think of it almost actually as stewardship. I'm thinking of it as stewardship of my choices, of my time, of my energy, of my life. Because, I think sometimes people, when we're thinking about goals or things that we're working toward, we have certain goals in mind. But I think sometimes we forget that actually we're already in the future now. Like right now is the future from a year ago or 2 years ago. Like I'm where I am now because of all the decisions and other things externally that happened over the past couple of years. And like I said, we cannot always control the things that happen externally, but we absolutely can control our responses, how we think and how we make wise decisions about the things that we do have influence and decision-making power over. And so I just want to leave people with that, to remember that be a really wise steward of your choices, of your time. Don't get stuck in the whole always prioritizing the urgent over the important. It's both and, right? It's both and. There's always space for some urgency, but remember that the important doesn't go away. And it's often when we have made decisions to prioritize the urgent on an ongoing basis at the expense of the important that we end up having regrets. So be wise with your decisions and be empowered as well. We have so much more power sometimes than I think that we realize. And as for where people can reach me, they can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm the only Malumir Logan on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out and connect with me there. And I also have a website, acornandburdock.ca. And that is my small business, my blog. If you're into tarot or spirituality or meditation, I've got lots of great content up there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Malumir. For everyone listening, once again, if you know this conversation could be impactful for a friend, a family member, a cousin, anybody like that, make sure to send it their way as well. And guys, we'll see you next time.